On a quiet autumn afternoon in Montana, a police chief discovers two little girls sitting by a frozen creek, their small hands clutching a blind German shepherd wrapped in a white cloth. They don't cry, they don't call for help, because they no longer believe anyone can see them. But when the man kneels beside them, promising protection, something begins to change. What happens next will test the meaning of family, faith, and the unseen miracles that arrive when we least expect them. The town of Willow Creek, Montana, sat tucked between rolling hills and dense pine forests, the kind of place where the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and river moss in the fall. October had begun to turn the valley into a patchwork of gold and russet, leaves scattering across gravel roads and the banks of the little creek that wound through the town. The weather that afternoon was brisk, the sort of crisp autumn chill that bit at the ears and reddened the hands, yet sunlight still slipped through the thinning canopy and made the water of the creek shimmer like liquid glass. It was the kind of day that usually calmed Michael Turner, a man who had spent most of his adult life walking the streets and trails of Willow Creek. Michael Turner was 38 years old, the chief of police in Willow Creek. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a frame shaped by years of both farm work in his youth and law enforcement later in life. His dark brown hair carried the faintest streaks of gray at the temples, a sign of the weight he carried and the nights spent awake during storms or emergencies. His eyes were a striking green, usually calm, but sharpened when danger lurked. Michael typically wore a red and gray flannel shirt under his brown leather jacket, with faded blue jeans and well-worn boots that had trudged through mud, snow, and countless autumn leaves. To the people of Willow Creek, he was steady and dependable, though those who knew him privately also knew of the sadness that shadowed him. His wife, Emily, had died in a car accident 6 years earlier, and since then Michael's house had grown quiet. He carried on with his work, serving the community. But his evenings were often filled with silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards and the whisper of wind through pine trees. On this particular afternoon, Michael had finished a routine patrol along the outskirts of town. He paused near the creek, watching the way the sunlight rippled across the water, when something unusual caught his eye. At first it seemed to be just a shape near the weathered wooden bridge, half hidden by a cluster of oak trees shedding their leaves. But as he walked closer, his boots crunching on the brittle carpet of gold and brown, he realized it was not a shape at all. It was movement. Sitting on a large stone near the edge of the creek were two small figures. They were children, unmistakably twins, no older than 5. Their legs dangled over the water, shoes soaked, and their thin cotton dresses clung damply to their small frames. The older by only minutes, though Michael could not yet tell which, clutched a worn teddy bear against her chest, its fur faded and one button eye missing. The other child wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking slightly, strands of blonde hair tangled by the wind. Michael's breath caught. He had seen lost children before, but these girls were not simply lost. They looked abandoned. Their cheeks were hollow, their eyes shadowed with fatigue, and their clothes bore stains of mud and wear that spoke of more than just one night outdoors. Near them, lying faithfully at their feet, was a dog, a German shepherd, its once proud body marked by age and hardship. Its thick sable and tan coat was matted in places, its eyes clouded over by blindness. Around its head was tied a strip of white cloth, neatly knotted at the back like a blindfold. Despite its blindness, the dog raised its nose toward Michael's approach, ears twitching, and released a low, protective rumble deep in its chest. This was Scout, 7 years old. Once, he had likely been a working dog. His posture still held dignity. His muscles, though, worn, still carried strength. But time and cruelty had left him sightless. The white blindfold was not for show. It kept dust and debris from irritating his damaged eyes. Yet, there was no mistaking the dog's devotion. Even without sight, Scout stood between the world and the children, guarding them with the loyalty only a German shepherd could muster. His presence was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a living shield against the cold world. Michael slowed his steps, careful not to alarm the children, or the dog. He crouched a few feet away, his voice low and steady. "Hey there," he said gently, his words almost blending with the rustle of the autumn wind. "My name's Michael. I'm here to help. Are you two all right?" The twins looked up at him with identical storm-gray eyes far too heavy for 5-year-old girls. The one clutching the teddy bear whispered first, "We don't have anywhere." Her voice was brittle, like paper tearing. The other tightened her hold on her knees and pressed closer to Scout. The dog leaned toward her, brushing his muzzle against her small shoulder, as if to reassure her that he, at least, would not leave. Michael felt his heart clench. He inched a little closer, keeping his hands open and palms visible. "It's all right," he said. "You don't have to be scared. What are your names?" The teddy bear girl spoke again, barely audible. "Anna," she gestured to her sister. "Grace." "Anna and Grace," Michael repeated softly, the names settling into his heart as if they had always belonged there. Beautiful names. He glanced at Scout, who was still watching, or sensing, every movement he made. "And who's this?" "Scout," Grace said for the first time, her voice trembling. "He can't see, but he sees us." Michael nodded slowly, as though the child's words carried more truth than poetry. "That's what matters." The autumn air grew colder as shadows stretched across the creek. Michael realized the girls could not stay out here another hour, let alone another night. He looked at them with a gentle firmness. "Would you like to come with me? I have a warm place and food and blankets. Scout can come too." The girls exchanged a glance. Anna squeezed her teddy bear. Grace whispered something into Scout's ear as though asking for his approval. The old dog nudged her hand with his nose, and at last, both children nodded. Michael stood and extended his hand. Anna reached first, her small fingers trembling in his large, calloused palm. Grace followed, clutching Scout's collar with her free hand, as the blind dog rose shakily to his feet. Michael guided them away from the creek, up the forest path, toward his truck parked by the roadside. What Michael did not see, what neither Anna nor Grace saw, was the figure watching from a distance. Hidden partly by the trees stood Margaret Collins, a woman in her mid-60s. Margaret had lived in Willow Creek her entire life, once a school teacher and now retired. She was of average height, with hair gone completely silver, usually tied into a bun. She wore a lavender cardigan and long wool skirt, and carried herself with a quiet dignity. Known for her sharp eyes and softer heart, she often observed the comings and goings of children in town, always ready to intervene if something seemed amiss. When Margaret saw Michael leading the twins and their dog away, her chest tightened. She recognized the look of hunger and fear on the children's faces. It was the look of neglect, a look she had seen in too many students over her years of teaching. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered to herself, "Those little ones. They've been invisible too long." Though she did not step forward then, Margaret made a silent decision. She would learn the truth about Anna and Grace, and she would not rest until she knew why two little girls had been left to fend for themselves with only a blind dog for protection. As the last light of the autumn day faded, the leaves whispered overhead, carrying with them a promise. Lives in Willow Creek were about to change forever. The narrow road leading out of Willow Creek twisted through the autumn forest, a ribbon of gravel strewn with fallen pine needles and oak leaves. Michael Turner drove slowly, his old Ford pickup creaking with each turn. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Anna, her small hands clutched tightly around a frayed teddy bear, eyes wide at every passing shadow of the trees. Grace sat in the middle, pressed close to her sister, one hand never leaving the thick collar of Scout. The German shepherd lay stretched across their laps, his head heavy against Grace's knee. Blind though he was, Scout remained alert, ears flicking toward every sound, as though refusing to surrender his duty of protection. Michael stole glances at them as he drove, his mind heavy with questions but his voice gentle. "It's a bit of a drive," he said softly, "but we'll be warm soon." Neither girl responded, only clutching tighter to what little they had. The silence reminded Michael of his own first nights after Emily's accident, when words had felt impossible and silence the only shield against grief. By the time the truck rumbled up the gravel drive to Michael's cabin, the sky had shifted into indigo dusk. The cabin itself was modest but sturdy, built of thick pine logs that had darkened with age. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, a reminder of the fire Michael had left smoldering before his patrol. A wooden porch wrapped around the front, its railings rough but reliable, and the soft glow of a lantern in the window promised warmth within. Michael parked and stepped out first, his boots crunching on the gravel. He opened the passenger door carefully. Anna climbed down hesitantly, her teddy bear still clutched like armor. Grace followed, leaning heavily on Scout, who eased himself onto the ground with a low grunt, tail swaying once as if to assure the children he was still strong enough to guard them. Michael reached for their small hands. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go inside." Inside the cabin, warmth enveloped them at once. The crackling fire painted the walls in flickers of amber light. The living room was simple, an old couch, a sturdy oak table scarred with years of use, shelves lined with books, and the occasional photograph framed in pine wood. The scent of cedar mixed with the faint aroma of coffee grounds. For Michael, this had always been a place of solitude, but tonight the cabin felt alive in a way it had not for years. Anna and Grace stood uncertainly on the woven rug, eyes darting around as though afraid to touch anything. Michael crouched to meet them at eye level. "You're safe here," he said, "and you're welcome to anything in this house. But first, let's get you something warm to eat." He moved to the kitchen, pulling down cans of soup and bread from the pantry. As he worked, the twins watched him, their hunger battling their hesitation. Scout padded slowly toward the fireplace, his paws steady despite his blindness, and lowered himself before the flames. With a sigh, he stretched out, head resting between his paws, ears twitching to the sound of every crackle. Michael returned with steaming bowls of chicken noodle soup and slices of buttered bread. He set the plates gently before the girls. "Go ahead," he encouraged. At first they stared, suspicious as though food might come with conditions. But then Anna dipped her spoon and tasted. Grace followed, and soon both were eating quickly, slurping broth and tearing bread into small bites. Michael watched, heart aching at the way they devoured the meal like children who had never known a full stomach. When the bowls were empty, he brought out blankets and guided them toward the spare bedroom. It had once been meant for a child, before fate had stolen that dream, but still held a simple wooden bed frame and quilt his mother had sewn years ago. Michael tucked Anna and Grace into the bed, side by side. They clutched each other tightly, Scout curling up on the rug beside the door. Though blind, he positioned himself so that no one could enter without passing him first. His loyalty was wordless, but absolute. Michael lingered in the doorway, watching as the girls' breathing slowed, their small bodies finally surrendering to sleep. A lump rose in his throat, the sight-stirring feelings he had long buried. For the first time in years, he felt the quiet weight of fatherhood settle over him, fragile but undeniable. He closed the door softly and whispered to himself, "You're not alone anymore." The following afternoon, as sunlight filtered golden through the pines, a knock echoed on the cabin door. Michael opened it to find Margaret Collins standing with a wicker basket in her arms. Margaret was a woman of 65, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her lavender cardigan buttoned tight against the autumn breeze. Her sharp eyes softened as she looked past Michael into the cabin, where the faint sound of children's laughter, small and tentative, floated from the bedroom. "I heard about your guests," Margaret said, stepping inside with the familiarity of someone who had spent decades watching over the town. She placed the basket on the table. Inside were 2 small dolls, their dresses handmade, along with a tin of cookies and a bundle of old picture books. "They'll need comfort," she said, her voice warm but edged with concern. Michael gestured for her to sit. "They were by the creek," he explained quietly. "No adults, just the dog." He rubbed a hand over his face. "They don't talk much, but what little I've learned tells me they've been on their own, longer than I care to think." Margaret folded her hands on the table, her rings glinting faintly in the firelight. "I saw them, you know," she said, more than once, wandering near the elementary school, looking through the playground fence while the other children played. They never joined in, always watching, always apart. Her eyes grew distant, the memory clearly haunting her. "I told myself someone must be caring for them, but in my heart I feared otherwise." Michael's jaw tightened. "You were right." Margaret leaned closer, her gaze steady. "Be careful, Michael. If they have family, someone may try to claim them. Not everyone does it out of love. Sometimes it's about money, or reputation, or worse." She paused, lowering her voice. "You need to be prepared. Protect them, yes, but also prepare to fight for them." Her words landed heavy, though Michael already knew them to be true. He glanced toward the closed bedroom door, where the sound of soft giggles now echoed faintly. mingling with the rustle of Scout shifting on the floorboards. "I'll fight," he said simply, his voice low but certain. Margaret reached across the table, her weathered hand resting briefly over his. "Then, you may be exactly what those girls have been waiting for." That evening, as the sun sank into crimson behind the mountains, Michael stepped onto the porch. Scout lay at his feet, head lifted to the wind, blind eyes hidden by the white cloth, yet turned as if seeing the world all the same. Inside the cabin, Anna and Grace curled together under the quilt, their small forms safe at last. The forest whispered around them, and for the first time in many years, Michael Turner felt the cabin was not a place of silence, but of life returning. The third evening in Michael Turner's cabin was colder than the last, the wind outside scraping dry leaves against the porch boards like whispers that refused to fade. Inside, however, the cabin glowed with warmth from the fire in the stone hearth, and the smell of pinewood smoke wrapped itself through the air. For the first time since they had arrived, Anna and Grace sat at the oak table, not with food before them, but with a box of crayons and sheets of plain paper that Michael had dug out of an old drawer. He thought it might help them speak without words. Anna was the first to press color to the page. She gripped the crayon tightly, too tightly for a child, and dragged it across the paper in sharp, uneven lines. Grace followed, her strokes softer, but both girls worked in silence, the only sound the faint scratch of wax on paper. Scout lay nearby on the rug, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every sound. The blind German shepherd, with his white cloth tied firmly across his eyes, seemed to sense the heaviness of the moment. Lifting his nose occasionally to scent the room, as though searching for what the girls could not say, Michael watched with a patient stillness, not pressing them, not asking questions. He had learned in his years as chief of police that sometimes the hardest truths came in the smallest gestures. Anna pushed her paper forward first. On it was a drawing of a small figure, crouched under a table drawn in crude brown lines. The figure had yellow hair like her own, her eyes wide circles shaded dark. Above the table was another figure, much larger, drawn in jagged black strokes that filled the page. It loomed, faceless but terrifying. Beside the child, another shape appeared, Scout, identifiable by the triangular ears and the cloth drawn across his eyes. The dog stood between the small figure and the looming shadow, as though shielding her. Grace's paper told a similar story. A little girl sat in the corner of a room, hugging her knees. The window had no light, only darkness, and outside stood a man-shaped shadow, taller than the house itself. Again, a dog was present, Scout, standing in front of the door, his body drawn like a barrier. Michael felt his chest tighten as he studied the pictures. They were not simple doodles of children's imagination. They were memories, expressions of fear, too deep for words. He leaned close, his voice gentle. "You drew very strong pictures," he said. This happened, didn't it?" Anna's lips trembled, but she nodded once, her eyes dropping back to the teddy bear clutched in her lap. Grace clung to her sister, silent but trembling. Michael wanted to ask more, but he stopped himself. He knew the signs of trauma, and he would not push too far, too fast. Instead, he placed a hand over their drawings and said softly, "I believe you." That night, after the twins were asleep, Michael sat at the kitchen table with the drawings spread out before him. Scout lay at his feet, the slow rhythm of his breathing the only sound besides the crackle of the fire. Michael's jaw was tight, his thoughts grim. Whoever the shadow in these drawings was, he had left scars that no 5-year-old should carry. Michael felt a fire in his chest, a promise to uncover the truth and to keep these girls safe. The next morning brought a knock at the door. Michael opened it to find Margaret Collins standing there, wrapped in a thick wool coat against the cold. Her silver hair glistened in the pale light, and her sharp eyes held both determination and sorrow. She carried a folder under her arm, worn at the edges from years of use. "Michael," she said, her voice steady, "we need to talk." He let her in, gesturing toward the table where the children's drawings still lay. Margaret glanced at them briefly, her lips pressing into a thin line, before she set down her folder. She removed her gloves carefully, as though bracing herself, then opened the folder to reveal several documents. "I went to the county records yesterday," she said. I couldn't stop thinking about those girls. I found their names, Anna and Grace Parker. Their parents, James and Lillian Parker, died in a car accident last year on the highway near Missoula. She looked at Michael with sorrow in her eyes. Since then, the girls were placed in the custody of their uncle, Richard Hayes. He is Lillian's younger brother. Michael frowned. And where is he now? Margaret's voice hardened. That's the problem. He's been living in a rented trailer outside of town. But he hasn't been caring for the girls. Neighbors said he disappears for days. From what I've gathered, he kept custody only to collect the state support payments. Money, Michael. That's all he wanted. Michael's hand clenched into a fist on the table. So, he abandoned them? Margaret nodded grimly. Yes. And by the looks of these drawings, she gestured toward the papers. He did worse than just abandon. Whether it was neglect or something darker. Those children lived in fear under his roof. The fire popped in the hearth, sending sparks upward. Michael leaned back, running a hand over his face. I knew they were hurt, but I didn't realize how deep. He looked toward the closed bedroom door where the girls were resting, the faint murmur of their voices just audible. I can't let him take them back. Not ever. Margaret's expression softened, though her eyes remained serious. Then, you need to be ready. If he tries to reclaim them, you'll need more than your word. You'll need evidence, witnesses, and the law on your side. Michael nodded slowly, his mind already turning. He was no stranger to legal battles, but this felt personal in a way nothing else ever had. These weren't just children who needed help for a night. These were children who needed a future. As the day wore on, the twins awoke and wandered sleepily into the living room, their hair tangled from dreams, but their faces softer than before. Margaret greeted them with a gentle smile, her grandmotherly nature shining through. She handed them each a small stuffed rabbit she had sewn years ago. These are for you, she said kindly, to keep you company. Anna clutched hers immediately, whispering a faint thank you. Grace pressed hers against Scout's fur, as though introducing the toy to the old dog. Scout sniffed it politely, then laid his head back down, content to let the child's small hands rest on him. Michael watched the exchange and felt a flicker of hope amid the storm of worry. The girls were still fragile, still haunted by shadows, but they were beginning to find comfort, and he knew then, with a certainty that burned in his chest, that he would fight anyone, family or stranger, who tried to drag them back into darkness. As the evening closed in and the forest outside grew silent under the weight of frost, Michael stood on his porch, Margaret's words echoing in his mind. Richard Hayes was still out there, and sooner or later he would come knocking. Michael tightened his jaw, the autumn wind whipping his flannel shirt against his frame. He looked back through the cabin window, where Anna and Grace sat drawing once more under Margaret's watchful eye, and Scout lay guarding the threshold. I won't let him have you, Michael whispered to himself, not while I still breathe. The first frost of November coated the pines of Willow Creek in a silver sheen, crunching underfoot as Michael Turner walked the perimeter of his cabin. He had grown used to the sound of children's laughter inside, the thin, cautious giggles of Anna and Grace as they drew or whispered to Scout in the warm glow of the fire. Yet the air that morning felt heavier, as though the forest itself knew something was approaching. Michael had just stacked a pile of wood when a vehicle rumbled up the gravel drive. It was not a neighbor's truck, but a black SUV with tinted windows, its tires spitting frost and stones. From the passenger seat stepped a man in his late 30s, Richard Hayes. Richard was tall but lean, his build more from arrogance than strength. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp but shadowed with neglect, and his expensive leather jacket looked out of place in the rugged Montana woods. His face carried a smirk that did not reach his eyes, which were restless and calculating. He walked with the swagger of someone who thought himself untouchable, though his reputation in town was the opposite. Whispers of drinking, debts, and a string of temp jobs abandoned without explanation. Behind him climbed out another figure, a woman in her 50s in a navy blue suit with a leather briefcase. His lawyer, Elaine Foster. Elaine was a woman of strict posture, her salt and pepper hair tied into a severe bun, glasses perched on her sharp nose. She had the kind of presence that filled a room before she spoke. Her reputation was well known in the county, a relentless attorney, clever with loopholes, though often criticized for defending clients everyone else had given up on. Her thin smile suggested she had already measured Michael as an opponent and dismissed him as inexperienced in legal battle. Michael stepped forward, jaw clenched, standing firm as the twins peeked fearfully from the cabin window. Scout rose stiffly from the rug inside, ears pricking at the sound of strangers, a low growl vibrating in his chest despite the white blindfold tied securely over his clouded eyes. Richard's smirk widened. Well, well, looks like my nieces found themselves a babysitter. He stuffed his hands in his pockets casually, though his words were laced with venom. I'm here to take them home. The front door creaked open, and Anna and Grace bolted outside before Michael could stop them. They clung to his legs, their small hands clutching his flannel shirt with desperate strength. Anna's voice broke first. Don't let him take us back, she whispered fiercely. Grace echoed, Please, don't send us there. Richard's eyes narrowed. See, this is what happens when kids get spoiled. They start saying all kinds of nonsense. They're mine, Michael, and the law says so. Michael's voice was calm, steady as granite. The law also protects children from neglect, Richard, and from people who use them like paychecks. Elaine Foster stepped forward smoothly, opening her briefcase. Mr. Hayes has legal custody. Unless you want to face charges for unlawful detention, I suggest you hand the children over, immediately. Michael's green eyes hardened. I won't hand them to a man who left them alone in the cold. If you want to test me, we'll do it in court. The standoff grew tense, the twins trembling as they pressed tighter against Michael. The forest was silent except for the brittle sound of Scout's growl, low and guttural, filling the space between the two men. Then, in the midst of the tension, a sudden scream shattered the moment. Anna, still clinging to Michael, had stumbled backward toward the porch steps. Her small foot slipped on the frosted wood, and she tumbled down, her body pitching toward the ground. Michael lunged, but Scout was faster. The blind dog sprang forward with surprising speed, his instincts sharper than his eyes. His teeth caught gently in the hem of Anna's sleeve, pulling her back with just enough force to keep her from striking the stones below. He steadied himself, tail stiff, body shielding her trembling form until Michael scooped her into his arms. The cabin door had been open long enough for others to witness. From across the road, a neighbor had been watching. The Anderson family, longtime residents of Willow Creek. Mr. Anderson, a sturdy man in his 50s with weathered hands from years of farming, called out as he hurried over, his wife trailing behind with concern in her eyes. I saw the whole thing, he said breathlessly. That dog saved her life. Those girls don't belong with you, Richard. More neighbors soon arrived, drawn by the sound of raised voices. The Johnsons from down the lane, Mrs. Clark with her basket of laundry still under one arm. They had all seen pieces of the truth over the months. The twins wandering alone, their clothes dirty, their faces pale with hunger. Now they saw Richard standing in the drive, smug and dismissive, while Michael held Anna safely against his chest, and Scout stood like a sentinel at his side. Elaine's confident smile faltered as murmurs spread through the crowd. Richard's face flushed with anger. They're my family, he spat. You people don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Clark, her gray hair whipping in the wind, shook her head firmly. We know enough. We saw those children hungry and alone, Richard, and now we've seen who protects them. It's not you. The community's quiet support wrapped around Michael like a shield. He looked at Richard directly, his voice steady. If you want to fight for them, Richard, we'll take it to court, but you won't bully them into your arms again. Not here, not today. Richard glared, his jaw tightening, but Elaine tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently. With the crowd gathered and witnesses forming, she knew pressing further now would only weaken their case. Chi snapped her briefcase shut. We'll see you in court, Chief Turner. The SUV's tires spun gravel as Richard climbed back in, seething with frustration. The vehicle roared down the road, leaving behind the echo of conflict unresolved but postponed. Michael stood in the driveway, holding Anna close while Grace pressed into his leg, her small body trembling. Scout leaned against them, his blindfold fluttering in the breeze, ears perked as if daring anyone else to challenge his watch. Margaret Collins appeared at the edge of the gathering, her lavender cardigan tugged tight against the chill. She met Michael's eyes and nodded once, firm and resolute. You'll need every bit of this community when the time comes, she said. And after what we just saw, I think you'll have it." Michael looked at the two girls, their tear-streaked faces pressed against him, and felt the weight of his vow deepen. He would not fail them. Whatever storm Richard Hayes brought next, Michael was ready to face it head-on. Chapter 4: Struggle and Testimony. The wind swept cold across Chicago that morning, its breath whistling through the streets like a warning from some ancient hand. Clouds hung low and gray, rolling across the skyline as if the heavens themselves were uneasy. Officer Jack Reynolds had seen many storms in his career, some in the weather, some in the hearts of men. But this one carried the weight of decisions that could shape a little girl's fate forever. He stood outside the social services building, his tall, broad frame cloaked in his police jacket, the silver threads of his once dark hair glinting faintly in the dim light. At his side, faithful as a shadow itself, was Shadow, the old German shepherd whose eyes had long since lost their sight, hidden now beneath a white bandana that fluttered in the wind. Shadow's ears twitched at every sound, and his nose lifted to scents Jack couldn't imagine, but the dog's loyalty was unwavering. He nudged Jack's leg gently, as though reminding him, "You are not alone." Inside the building, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the walls carried that sterile, bureaucratic scent of paper and old carpet. Jack walked into the meeting room, Emily Parker at his side. She was a slight figure of just 8 years, with thin arms and chestnut brown hair that fell in tangled strands around her face. Today she wore a soft sweater borrowed from Mrs. Miller, its sleeves a little too long, so that her small hands disappeared inside. Her green eyes darted around the room with nervous energy, clutching her worn doll as if it were the last anchor to her world. Across the table sat Marianne Clark, the social services officer assigned to Emily's case. She was a woman in her early 50s, sharp-featured with steel-gray hair cut in a bob and square glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her suit was neatly pressed, her posture impeccable, but her voice carried the kind of practiced neutrality that Jack had always distrusted. Marianne had spent decades in the system, and though she told herself she cared, her tone had grown mechanical, her judgments often hidden behind words like policy and procedure. To her, families were puzzles to be reunited, no matter how jagged the pieces were. "Officer Reynolds," Marianne said crisply, folding her hands on the table, "we appreciate your concern, but Emily has a legal guardian. The law requires us to consider reunification first, unless there is overwhelming evidence of harm." Her eyes glanced briefly at Emily, then back to the file in front of her. "And I have not been given such evidence." Emily shrank further into her chair, whispering so softly Jack almost missed it. "Don't let them send me back. Please, don't let them make me disappear again." Her words trembled like a candle flame, fighting the draft of the room. Shadow, though blind, moved closer. The dog pressed his muzzle against Emily's hand, and when his rough fur brushed her small fingers, she clutched him tightly. A small sob escaped her lips, but there was also relief in the way she buried her face against his neck. Jack felt something break inside him at that sight. Jack leaned forward, his voice low but edged with steel. "With respect, Ms. Clark, what Emily needs isn't a rubber stamp on a form. She needs safety. She needs care. She's not just another case number in your file." Marianne's lips pressed thin. "Emotional pleas are not sufficient grounds to keep her from her guardian, unless you can provide tangible evidence of abuse or neglect." Jack's fist clenched under the table, though he kept his tone calm. "Then I'll get it. But until then, she's staying somewhere safe." He glanced at Emily, who was holding on to Shadow as though the dog were her lifeline, and then looked back at Marianne. "If you try to move her before I have my say, you'll find me standing in your way." The tension in the room was thick, the kind that weighed on the lungs and made every breath heavier. Emily's whisper broke through again, fragile but clear. "Don't let them take me." Jack laid a hand on the table, palm open. "Emily," he said softly, "I won't. I promise you, I won't." And then, for the first time, he pulled the silver police badge from his pocket and laid it gently in front of her. "This is mine, but today, it's yours too. It means I'll fight for you, no matter what it takes." Emily stared at the badge, her green eyes wide, and for a moment, she looked less like a child lost in fear and more like a girl beginning to believe in hope again. Far from the storm brewing in the office, in another part of the city, Mrs. Evelyn Thompson was carrying her own battle. She was a retired schoolteacher now in her early 60s, her once auburn hair streaked with silver and tied back into a neat bun. She wore a cardigan faded from years of use, and glasses dangled from a chain around her neck. Evelyn had always been the kind of teacher who saw not just the lesson, but the heart of the child. It was that gift which had made her see Emily's pain long before anyone else did. On this day, she stood outside the police precinct, clutching a thick envelope to her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of responsibility she carried. Inside the envelope were Emily's drawings, pictures that began with rainbows, flowers, and sunshine, but over time had twisted into darker images. Children crouched in corners, figures looming above them, skies filled with black scribbles. And tucked alongside those drawings was a folded note, Emily's secret wish from the magic box in her classroom. "I wish someone would see me." When Evelyn stepped into Jack's office, she found him hunched over his desk, Shadow lying faithfully at his feet, Emily dozing softly in a chair nearby. Evelyn's eyes softened at the sight of the girl, her chest aching with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "Officer Reynolds?" she said, her voice gentle but steady. Jack looked up, and Evelyn stepped forward, holding out the envelope. "I think you'll want to see these. They're Emily's drawings. I kept them because I was afraid no one else would understand what they meant." Jack opened the envelope carefully, his eyes scanning the shifting timeline of a child's spirit, bright colors dissolving into darkness. His jaw tightened. These are cries for help. And this," Evelyn said, pulling out the folded paper, "is her voice, written weeks before she ever sat on that bench by the lake." She handed it to him, and Jack read the small, uneven handwriting. "I wish someone would see me." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Jack closed the envelope and looked up at Evelyn with a fire in his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. This is exactly what I need. With your permission, I'll present this as evidence. It may be the only thing that saves her." Evelyn nodded, her hands clasped tightly. "Please, just make sure she's safe. She deserves so much more than what she's been given." Jack glanced at Emily again, still curled beside Shadow, her breathing finally even, her small hand resting on the dog's fur. "She will be," he said firmly, "because we're not letting her down again." The storm outside rumbled, thunder echoing faintly across the city. But inside, in that dim office filled with the quiet weight of truth, alliances were forged. Jack Reynolds, officer of the Chicago PD, and Evelyn Thompson, a teacher who never stopped caring, would now fight side by side, for Emily, for justice, and for the chance to break the silence that had nearly swallowed her whole. The courthouse in Missoula stood tall against the pale morning sky, its stone pillars dusted with frost, breath of those gathered hanging like smoke in the crisp Montana air. Inside, the hall was crowded, townsfolk from Willow Creek filling the benches, their presence quiet but firm. They had not come out of curiosity. They had come to stand behind the man and two children who had become the heart of their community. Michael Turner walked into the courtroom, wearing his cleanest flannel beneath a dark jacket, his broad frame stiff with determination. His green eyes, usually calm, burned with the weight of responsibility. At his side, Anna and Grace clung to his hands. The twins wore simple wool dresses Margaret had mended for them, Anna in pale blue, Grace in soft pink. Their blonde hair had been brushed carefully, ribbons tied by Margaret herself that morning, though their faces still carried traces of nerves. Behind them padded Scout, the old German shepherd, guided by the touch of Grace's hand on his collar. The white cloth blindfold tied around his eyes looked almost ceremonial, as if marking him guardian and witness both. The bailiff frowned, but allowed the dog to remain when murmurs from the community rose in protest. Scout, after all, had earned his place here. On the opposite side sat Richard Hayes, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, his hair slicked too much, his expression one of smugness poorly masking unease. Beside him, attorney Elaine Foster adjusted her glasses and shuffled a stack of papers, her sharp features betraying confidence, though her eyes flickered with recognition of the crowd's hostility. At the bench presided Judge Harold Whitmore, a man in his late 50s with a broad frame and thinning silver hair. His lined face was stern, though not unkind, and his gray eyes carried the weight of decades spent balancing justice with mercy. Known across the county for his patience and refusal to be swayed by theatrics, Judge Whitmore was a man who demanded truth above all. He tapped his gavel once. "This court will come to order." The hearing began with Elaine presenting Richard's claim. Her voice was crisp, her posture unyielding. "Your Honor, my client is the legal guardian of Anna and Grace Parker. He has the rightful custody, established after the tragic death of their parents. We acknowledge challenges in recent months, but he is prepared to resume his responsibilities fully. The children must be returned to him." Michael sat still, his jaw tight, but his hands never leaving the twins. Anna's small fingers squeezed his, as if holding on to the only anchor she trusted. When it was his turn, Michael rose slowly, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "Your Honor, these girls have known nothing but neglect under Richard Hayes. They were found alone, cold, hungry, and terrified. If not for Scout, they might not be alive today. I am not their blood, but I have given them food, warmth, safety, and love. I will fight to give them a home where they are seen, not forgotten." The murmurs in the courtroom swelled. The first witness called was Margaret Collins. She walked to the stand with dignity, her lavender cardigan neat, her silver hair pinned back. Her sharp eyes softened as she looked at Anna and Grace. "I was their teacher once, and I've lived in Willow Creek all my life. I saw them wandering near the schoolyard, standing outside the fence while other children played. They wore the same clothes for days. I regret not speaking sooner, but I am here now to say, those girls were abandoned. Michael Turner is the first person who has truly seen them. He is what they need." Her words rang heavy with truth, and many in the benches nodded, some dabbing tears. Other neighbors followed. Mr. Anderson testified how Scout had saved Anna from a fall. Mrs. Clark described seeing the twins scavenging near her property. Each account chipped away at Richard's defense until even Elaine's polished words faltered. Finally, Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Anna, Grace," he said gently, "would you like to speak? Only if you're ready." The courtroom fell silent. Anna glanced at Grace, then at Michael, who nodded with quiet encouragement. Hand in hand, the twins stepped to the front, Scout limping behind to rest at their feet like a sentinel. Anna's voice was small but clear. "Michael and Scout, they always see us, even when we feel invisible." Grace added, her eyes shining. "With him, we're not scared. We have food and stories and someone who listens. We don't want to go back. We want to stay with him." The judge's gaze softened. "Why?" Anna pressed her teddy bear to her chest, then whispered words that made the courtroom stir with emotion. "Because he's our dad now." The silence broke with muffled sobs across the benches. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his composure crumbling. Judge Whitmore looked at him sharply. "Mr. Hayes, do you wish to respond?" Richard tried to speak, but his words stumbled. The crowd's glares and the children's testimony had stripped him of his confidence. Elaine urged him, but even she seemed defeated. Richard muttered something about trying his best, but the judge raised a hand to cut him off. "This court has heard enough," Judge Whitmore declared. He looked down at the twins, then at Michael. "The law does not exist to reward neglect. It exists to protect the innocent. Custody of Anna and Grace Parker is hereby granted to Michael Turner. This court recognizes him as their legal guardian." The gavel struck. The sound echoed like a bell of freedom. Anna and Grace turned instantly, wrapping their arms around Michael's waist. Grace buried her face in his jacket, whispering, "Dad." Anna echoed her, tears streaking her cheeks, but these were tears of release. Scout leaned against Michael's leg, his white blindfold shifting as though, even in blindness, he shared in the triumph. Behind them, Margaret stood smiling through tears. The townsfolk applauded softly, respectful in the solemnity of the courtroom, but filled with relief. That evening, back at the cabin, the fire blazed warmly. Anna and Grace played on the rug, their laughter filling the small space as Scout lay near the door, his body stretched protectively across the threshold. Margaret sat in a rocking chair, knitting as she hummed an old lullaby. Michael leaned on the porch railing outside, the cold wind on his face, but inside his heart, a rare peace. Scout lifted his head once, the white cloth fluttering in the draft, as if saluting the forest around them. He looked timeless, a guardian carved of loyalty, a silent protector whose watch would never end. For the first time in many years, the cabin no longer echoed with silence. It rang with the music of children's laughter, an anthem of new beginnings, of a home finally whole. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not flashes of lightning or voices from the sky, but the quiet moments when love defeats fear, and family is born not of blood, but of compassion. Just as Michael, Anna, Grace, and even a blind dog named Scout found their way into each other's hearts, so too does God remind us that we are never truly invisible. In the hands of others, guided by His light, we are always seen. And in our own lives, we are called to be that light. Perhaps your act of kindness, your listening ear, or your prayer could be the very miracle someone else is waiting for today. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you love, leave a comment to let us know what it meant to you, and subscribe to join us for more stories of hope and redemption. And above all, let us pray together. May God bless and protect you and your family, just as He blessed Anna and Grace with a new home. If you believe in the power of His love, write Amen in the comments and let your faith shine for others to see.